Alternative news. Possible evidence that COVID-19 came out of the Wuhan lab. Ex-President Obama makes a reference to the U.S. government funding and training ISIL, aka ISIS, or the Islamic State, as well as stating that he is from Kenya, Africa. I'll explain why the idea of conservative Muslims supporting the Democratic Party is disinformation. Americans want justice for General Michael Flynn. We'll talk about declassified documents related to the case. We'll talk about UFOs, secret military bases, and all that and more coming up. I wanted to be on the camera in the studio, and I'm going to have that taken care of within the next month or two at the most. It's for some reason the last couple times that I was in the studio on the camera, it had me out of focus really bad, and it didn't look very good. I get myself dressed up nice and keep myself pretty clean cut. And then I should look pretty good on the camera, and the thing's out of focus. It looked horrible. So I do apologize. I am going to get that taken care of. And then usually, not always, but usually I'll be on the camera when I present information to you guys. Here's something here. Things most people do not know about former President Barack Hussein Obama. With evidence mounting that former U.S. President Barack Hussein Obama orchestrated a takedown of current President Donald Trump, new information and videos are being uncovered or intentionally exposed. The real person and life of Barack Obama is being revealed, and it's very disturbing. In a 2015 announcement, President Obama says U.S. taxpayers, parentheses, federal government, is training and supporting the terrorist group ISIS. And he doesn't actually say ISIS. That's what this article says. He says ISIL. But I do want to clarify, I looked into this. Some people may not be aware of this. So ISIL stands for Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. And it is the same organization as ISIS. It's also known as ISIS, which stands for Islamic State of Iraq and Syria.
As I've said before, this aspect of our strategy was moving too slowly, but the fall of Ramadi has galvanized the Iraqi government. So with the additional steps I ordered last month, we're speeding up training of ISIL forces, including volunteers from Sunni tribes in Anbar province.
Another term for ISIL and ISIS is just IS, which stands for Islamic State for short. And then here we're going to play a clip, and this is supposedly what it is. It says, while watching a 9/11 commemoration ceremony, First Lady Michelle Obama turns to President Obama and says disgustingly, quote, "All this for a damn flag," unquote. And then President Obama nods his head in agreement. It actually says Barack nods his head in agreement. So I'm not sure if, I don't really know the background of this. And I just want to say a few things real quick before I play this. I don't know if this even is from the time that he was president, or if it was prior to that when he was a senator. I don't know for a fact that this was from a 9/11 commemoration ceremony. That's what they're saying. It wouldn't surprise me at all. And then, of course, what they're saying is that Barack Obama had no true love or respect for this country and for the American flag. That's what the article is asserting, and what the video supposedly is showing and demonstrating. But again, I can't I can't say 100%, for sure several things, and that's that this was actually from a 9/11 commemoration ceremony. I can't say for certain what flag they were referring to because they don't specify or show, but I do think it's probably likely that it's true. What this article is claiming is true, that they were referring to the American flag and that it was a 9/11 commemoration ceremony. Let's take a look. Again, I don't know why I play that. I know it's a little bit weak. We don't even hear them what they're saying. Um, so I'm not sure how they got that. If are they did they read the lips, or was there some audio that just isn't being played in this clip? A lot of questions with that there, but kind of interesting, and I figured I would just share it from Above Top Secret. Here's another clip we're going to watch in a moment that somebody added to kind of just get into the conversation. They were aware of something and they wanted to share it. So we'll play it in a moment. President Obama claims during a speech that he's from Kenya. But before I do that, I want to say real quick, there's been a lot of talk that the Democrats and like the deep state, like here, let me just read this article right here real quick. It says that Obama was a drug dealer when he was a kid in Hawaii. I don't know if that's true. This is just what somebody put in a comment. And that he's a Muslim with in the Muslim Brotherhood and CAIR, which most of the world deem as terrorists. And then it says Obama and John Brennan, who's another Muslim convert. He converted when he was in Saudi Arabia, parentheses, thought they could bypass procedural law and install enough corrupt officials that the Dems, or Democrats, would easily win the 2016 election by any means necessary. Obama, when he was president, him and Kerry tried pushing gun control legislation, and it meant very heavy bipartisan opposition. So there are Democrats I've noticed who believe in the Constitution, and they will, if they need to, they'll stand up to defend the Constitution. And we've seen it time and time again when this unconstitutional gun control legislation is pushed. So I don't want to villainize, the Democrats altogether, the entire party, but definitely looks like the deep state is coming out of the left, and so some of them seem like they're connected to the deep state. Basically, they're trying to act like that Muslims are connected to like the Democratic Party or the deep state. I would say more the deep state. But anyway, my point is that that's a ridiculous thing to think or to say, because, and I'll explain why. Islam is very conservative. It's extremely, extremely conservative, and they it's a ridiculous. If you study Islam, first of all, they don't even really follow what Muhammad wanted. Muhammad didn't want everything that he did and stuff to be written down and for people to try to copy him, and that's exactly what they did with the Hadith. And another point I want to make real quick is in Islam they believe in Jesus. They call Jesus the prophet Isa. And then I study spiritual science, and spiritual science explains that there were two Jesuses. There was what we call the Solomon Jesus, and then what we call the Nathan Jesus. And so what that means is that one of the Jesuses came from the Solomon family line, was a descendant of Solomon, in other words, and the other one was a descendant of Nathan. And one was, you know, the Jewish Jesus, that would be the Solomon Jesus. And then the other one, the Nathan Jesus, appears to be what the Muslims call the prophet Isa. So Islam should, or you know, the Muhammad religion should include Jesus or Isa, and I believe that very spiritual Muslims do believe in Jesus or the prophet Isa. That's obviously who. Well, no, it was I believe it was the angel Gabriel that gave the Quran to Muhammad in a cave, but that's all pretty interesting stuff. And so, but when I teach the spiritual science stuff, or I talk about it, and I talk about the Christ, I always, I'm going to try to get more into the habit of not giving the impression that I'm only referring or talking to Christians and talking about the mainstream Christian Christ. The Christ spirit went into both of these Jesuses, the Nathan Jesus and the Solomon Jesus, but that's a whole nother story. But I want to include everyone, even followers of Muhammad or Islam, in the teachings, and they can follow the Christ impulse or the Christ spirit by looking more into their what they call their prophet Isa, and that would be the prophet Jesus, the Nathan Jesus, if my understanding is correct. I'm looking more into it, but to get back on track, my point to all this is that I think it's ridiculous to the idea that, you know, Islam as a religion, or, you know, Muslims as a people in general, would ever support something extremely liberal or the Democrats or anything like that. It's nonsense, because they're the most conservative people that you'll ever find. They're using and paying people who are in these groups, like terrorist groups and stuff like that. First of all, they fund them, they form them, and I'm talking about the deep state and the shadow government and other shadow governments in other countries will organize these terrorist groups, and they'll fund them, they'll organize them, they'll pay them to do these bad things, and then they'll say that it's Islam and that it's Muslims doing it, and that, you know, they'll act like Muslims or and Islam is like, you know, on the same team as the Democrats, when really it's not all Democrats either. It's just deep state and shadow government people.
3 years ago, I visited Kenya as the first sitting American president to come from Kenya. And
Back to the point I was making a few minutes ago. They always want to make it into like a religious thing, as if politics didn't already divide people enough. They want to turn it into like a religious thing, you know, and so is a Muslim, and the Muslims are, you know, collaborating with you know, the Democrats, when really it's just the deep state who are using people and paying them and organizing them and funding them and acting like they're Muslims, when you might be able to say they're terrorists, but that's what they're being paid to do. And so that it's all just a bunch of BS, and it's the veil. You know, they pull the veil over people's eyes, and you have to question all of it. And anytime that it's stuff that's meant to divide people, you should question it. And moving forward into the future, we're going to have a new threefold system where the economics, you know, the economy, the government, and religion are 100% separate, and they're not linked or connected in any way. Right now, they are. And you can even see how in politics and stuff, they try to turn it into a religious issue. And there's all these things are mixed up and connected and twisted together, and it's to divide people and to mind control the masses. And moving forward into the future, we're gonna have to get away from that, and that's what I think we're going to be seeing more and more. People need to support Trump, and I think he's going to help us move away from a lot of this stuff here. Here's something here. Obama new details of wiretapped Flynn phone calls, surprising top DOJ official. We now have some evidence of how the Obama administration was operating and perhaps what at least one DOJ, Department of Justice official was thinking during a now exposed secret White House meeting. We have Obama and others discussing the Michael Flynn situation at the time on January 5th, 2017, before Trump took office. Sally Yates was one attendee and at the time was Deputy Attorney General. She testifies she was surprised about Obama having info on Flynn. Well, of course, she testified to what she supposedly was thinking because it's impossible to prove what somebody was thinking. Or disprove what somebody claims that they were thinking, I think is more what it's trying to say. Obama also apparently did not want any information about Flynn. Well, that's pretty obvious because Obama already had all the information available, so Yates again testified about what somebody was, quote, thinking. Sally Yates was acting AG, Attorney General, for something like 10 whole days under Trump until Trump ash-canned her for insubordination. Obama knew details of wiretapped Flynn phone calls surprising top Department of Justice official in meeting with Biden, declassified documents show. On January 5, 2017, Yates attended an Oval Office meeting with then FBI Director James Comey, then Vice President Joe Biden, then CIA Director John Brennan, and then Director of National Intelligence James Clapper, according to the newly declassified documents, including a FD-302 FBI witness report. They were discussing Russian election interference along with National Security Advisor Susan Rice and other members of the National Security Council. After the briefing, Obama asked Yates and Comey to, quote, stay behind, unquote, and said he had learned of the information about Flynn, unquote, and his conversation with Russia's ambassador about sanctions. Obama, quote, specified that he did not want any additional information on the matter, but was seeking information on whether the White House should be treating Flynn any differently given the information, unquote. A previous memo from Rice stated that Biden also stayed behind after the main briefing had ended. Law enforcement agencies refusing to enforce unconstitutional lockdown orders. Michigan sheriffs band together in defiance of Governor Whitmer's unconstitutional shutdown. Rebel Northern Californian sheriffs refused to enforce Governor Newsom's unconstitutional beach shutdowns. Washington State. At least 20 county sheriffs refused to enforce new gun laws. 2 Arizona county sheriffs are refusing to enforce coronavirus emergency orders, and it's also happening across the country, including but not limited to Alabama, Maryland, Wisconsin, and Illinois. Even New York City police have questioned enforcement of these lockdown policies. NYPD says it's reevaluating social distancing enforcement policies and procedures. At the July 1979 MUFON UFO Symposium in California, Ward Kimball told the audience that around 1955 or 1956, Walt Disney was contracted by the U.S. Air Force and asked to produce a documentary about UFOs that included U.S. Air Force shot footage proving the existence of real UFOs. At the time, the U.S. Air Force had promised to give Kimball and Disney this footage to include in the documentary, and the idea was that this sort of news would be received better if it was coming from the family-friendly Disney, who was no stranger to working with the military, having produced propaganda videos during World War II. So Disney went ahead and began creating the documentary, tasking its animators with coming up with a concept for what an alien would look like, But when it came time to insert the real footage, the Air Force rescinded its initial offer, all but squashing the documentary. Disney still had all of these animated creatures that he created for the doc, though, and so he decided to push forward, bringing on Jonathan Winters to voice many of the characters created for the movie, including an old lady who witnessed a UFO and a little boy who spots an alien through his telescope. Here's something interesting. Cell phone data records show shutdown of Wuhan virology lab in October. Using cell phone data, we can determine the Wuhan lab has something going on in October 2019. Not surprising, of course, and there's an effort to undermine the findings and to exonerate China. Cell phone records show there was a shutdown at the Wuhan virology lab in October 2019. Cell phone data suggests the roads around the Wuhan lab were also shut down for a number of days in October. This was around the same time of the expected viral release. Senator Cotton also added there is no doubt the Chinese Communist Party officials were pressuring the World Health Organization on communications around the virus. The report, obtained by the London-based NBC News Verification Unit, says there was no cell phone activity in a high-security portion of the Wuhan Institute of Virology from October 7th through October 24th, 2019, and that there may have been a, quote, hazardous event, unquote, sometime between October 6th and October 11th. Now, I find this information very, very interesting, and the reason why is because I think it is a little bit of evidence that the COVID-19 came out of that Wuhan lab. So basically, if you look at the time frame and what this shows is that nobody was in that area of the lab when there was no cell phone activity, which means that the lab was quarantined because of the COVID-19 outbreak right there within the lab. And if you look at the time frame, I think this is direct evidence. This is the smoking gun that the COVID-19 came out of that lab. And not only that, but the report goes as far as to say that they shut down all the roads in that area for a number of days. They quarantined the entire area of Wuhan around the lab. Coming up, we're going to listen to a report it was on the Fox News Rundown podcast, where they're talking about China punishing countries who don't want to participate in this rollout of 5G. Visit the Rudolf Steiner Archive YouTube channel to learn about who built the Egyptian pyramids and how they did it, the ancient Atlanteans and their flying airships, why humanity suffers disasters, pandemics, and cataclysms. Learn about these mysteries and more right here on YouTube.
That after a small handful of cases were detected in Wuhan, China, officials there said they'd be testing all 11 million residents. Wuhan is, of course, where evidence shows the virus outbreak began. And despite apparent efforts from China to downplay the virus, they couldn't hide the entirety of their reaction. And that is what caught the attention of one senator now leading the charge against China.
I could tell early on in January that China's rhetoric that they were in control and the virus was not a threat and there's no cause for alarm contrasted with their draconian extreme measures to counteract the virus.
Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton.
It's like canceling schools nationwide or literally welding the doors shut on apartment buildings. So that's what set off the alarms to me early on. But for as long as I've been in public life, I've recognized China is a grave threat to the United States, with an ultimate ambition to replace us as the world's preeminent economic and military power. So some of the measures I've proposed, like trying to keep Huawei, the Chinese telecom giant that is effectively an arm of Chinese intelligence, out of Western telecom systems, are longstanding. Now, I've introduced new measures related to this virus, for instance, trying to bring back pharmaceutical manufacturing to the United States, and other measures that are designed more broadly to check Chinese emissions in the Western Pacific and around the world. And that's because China is the most serious long-term threat the country faces to our security and prosperity.
When we talk about bringing pharmaceutical manufacturing back, how delicate a process is that? And do we run the risk of China saying, oh, you're going to go ahead and do that? Well, we're just going to stop making the medications you need right now.
So China is already threatening those kinds of actions against many nations, threatening to withhold either drugs or needed protective equipment from nations if, for instance, they don't agree to use Huawei in their fifth-generation wireless build-out. Or just refusing to send protective equipment to a country unless the head of state goes and meets the Chinese airplane and kowtows on the tarmac for the cameras. So we have to be mindful that in the short term, the world is somewhat dependent, not entirely, but somewhat dependent on China for both drugs and medical equipment. But that's why in the medium and especially the long term, we can never allow China to continue to have such a stranglehold on so many critical supplies to keep our people safe, healthy, and prosperous.
Where are you, though, on our own mistakes? It seems like we did make quite a few here, China or not, whether that was, not maybe having enough equipment on our own stockpile, to our own testing delays and failures, including, unbelievably, our own tests, some of which were tainted with the actual virus.
Yeah, so first off, I would commend the president for taking an action that was considered very controversial at the time of stopping air travel from China in late January. I'd advocated for that since the middle of January when I first started contrasting Chinese rhetoric to action. That bought us several weeks of needed time. And it did the same thing with Europe as well. Again, it wasn't foolproof. It wasn't ever going to stop the virus from reaching the United States, but it certainly bought time. You're right that probably the worst mistake the federal bureaucracy has made is when the Centers for Disease Control insisted on doing its own tests, manufacturing its own tests from scratch, rather than, if you will, letting 1,000 flowers bloom in some of our great laboratories and companies all around the world. The FDA as well, allowed the CDC to do that, and then was slow on certifying other possible tests in early February. So that's regrettable. In the end, though, the challenge that we have had is not so much a science challenge about developing the right kind of test. It's really a production challenge of being able to develop testing equipment for a nation of 330 million people, as opposed to, say, Austria with a nation of 8 million people, or Taiwan, an island nation of 22 million people. But over time, we have begun to meet that challenge. That's why now, on a per capita basis, we have one of the best records in the country for testing. But it would have been better early on, of course.
Of course. I mean, look at how many people have died. Look at how many people have died since then. I mean, do you think testing could have made a big difference?
So I think the lessons that we've seen from countries around the world is that testing can help slow the spread of the virus and therefore help protect the capacity of our hospital systems, which again is the reason why we instituted such severe measures in March related to social distancing. But in the end, the virus is so highly contagious in so many different settings, testing can only do so much. It's better to have more testing than less testing. Especially testing at sites that are most vulnerable, like nursing home sites or critical infrastructure that can only engage in a limited amount of social distancing given the necessities of work, like meatpacking plants. So testing is very important in those places. But in the end, even the nations that have had the best approach to testing, especially in Europe, you still see pretty significant numbers of cases and deaths on a per capita basis. And sadly, that's just a reflection of the very highly contagious and very deadly nature of the virus for some populations.
States are starting to reopen, as you know, some allowing more than others. This is apparently changing the models, I guess, yet again. University of Washington's Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation is now estimating that about 137,000 people could die from COVID. And I think a lot of us don't really know what to say anymore about these models changing, right? Like if you're for reopening because you care about livelihoods and jobs, then you're accused of being okay with letting people die. And then you hear, you know, far more people may die because we're increasing mobility. And it's just, it's like everybody's between a rock and a hard place. Like, what do we do here?
Well, I've never been a big fan of any of the models. Not to say that models can't be useful for decision making, but they're always based to a degree on speculation as opposed to hard information. So I prefer to look at the hard data. We have a lot of data now that we didn't have 2 months ago, not just from the United States and places like New York that were particularly hard hit, but also from Europe. And you see countries that were hit with the virus a few weeks before we were. They're now been a few weeks ahead of us in terms of getting their economy back on its feet. And so far, seems to be working for them in places like Austria and Denmark and Germany as well. So I think we should learn as much as we can from those international models and also examples, not models, I should say. And then also, you know, kind of gradually move forward with getting our economy back on its feet, getting people back to work, getting them back in their normal routines. Obviously, if there's a big surge in cases somewhere, that might cause us to recalibrate or pull back on the reins a little bit. But it's vitally important that we get people back to work, back into their normal routines, because the government cannot replace the economy. And without a healthy, strong, functioning economy, people are at risk not just of their livelihoods, but also their health as well. You know, they're foregoing basic treatments like mammograms or colon screenings.
Yeah.
They are, in many cases, suffering from mental health challenges or stress related to family and the workplace and so forth. So the health and the economic questions are more interconnected than much of the media commentary would suggest. And we have to keep both those things in mind.
Senator, when we talk about reopening and we look at a model country like South Korea, they're experiencing an increase in cases. And we kind of thought they had mastered this, right? But now they're starting to see some more. With contract tracing, now they're trying to notify over 1,500 people after one infected person visited a number of bars and nightclubs in one evening. I think this speaks, one, to the importance of contract tracing, I guess, and knowing who's infected, and two, how one person can do just so much damage and upend the work that you do when you try and isolate for a while.
Yeah, and you know, obviously South Korea has been one of the leading examples in the world, along with Taiwan, for keeping the virus under control. So I'm troubled by the resurgence in cases there over the last couple of days. I certainly hope that they get it under control again. You see the same thing happen in Singapore in April. They had been a world leader as well in March, and then they had a large flare up in April that I think is continuing. It's just a reminder that no matter how much testing there is, how much contact tracing, the virus is so contagious, and there's still so much we don't know about it.
Finally, Senator, on stimulus, you know, there's still a lot of talk that even more is needed as we work slowly towards getting back to normal. I know some Democrats want to give a lot more money to people. Congress has already allocated almost $3 trillion. The president's talking about a payroll tax cut. Our governor in California says 4.5 million people are unemployed, and we had a budget surplus that is now a massive deficit. Where are you on stimulus and how much more we're going to give, and whether or not we could give any to states and counties?
Well, so the Congress has already approved about $3 trillion of spending to help survive the peak of this crisis. A lot of that money, though, hasn't gone out the door. It hasn't hit the pockets of individual workers in the case of enhanced unemployment benefits, which are approved at the end of July, or money to aid state and local governments or to help our hospital systems. So I think for the time being, there's enough money still in the pipeline for us to see how that works, and that hopefully, within a matter of weeks, not months, we will begin to see people getting back to something more like their normal work and consumption routines, and that it won't be necessary to have trillions of dollars of more spending to replace the productive economic activities of our citizens. In the end, I think most people don't want a relief check, they want a paycheck. And that's where I hope we can get very soon, a matter of weeks, not in a matter of months.
Senator Khan, thank you so much for your time.
Yep, thank you.
And now I'm going to get into a story I've been trying to cover, but so far I've only mentioned it briefly in a couple of videos, but I haven't really talked about it too much. It's not easy to get information. China does not want this information to get out. They've made a sustained effort to suppress this information, and that is the persecution of Muslims in Western China. I know Sean Hannity talks about the New York Times as he calls it the toilet paper times, but it looks to me like the New York Times is the only news company covering this topic. I do like Sean Hannity. I'm not knocking him, but New York Times is covering this topic. Here we have China's detention camps for Muslims turn to forced labor. And it shows on TV, they actually had it on video, Muslims attending classes on how to be law-abiding citizens, and that there's evidence that has come forward that detainees are also being forced to take jobs in factories. Kashgar, China, Muslim inmates from internment camps in far west China hunched over sewing machines in row after row. They were among hundreds of thousands who have been detained and spent month after month renouncing their religious convictions. So it looks like the Chinese government is putting them in these prison camps and then putting them through some sort of a rehabilitation program where it's not so much a rehabilitation as it is they're trying to convert them away from Islam. Now the government was showing them on television as models of repentance, earning good pay and political salvation as factory workers. Sounds typical of Chinese. Isn't that what they kind of do to their own people? China's ruling Communist Party has said in a surge of upbeat propaganda that a sprawling network of camps in the Xinjiang region is providing job training and putting detainees on production lines for their own good, offering an escape from poverty, backwardness, I'm sorry for laughing, and temptations of radical Islam. And I know it's horrible for me to laugh, folks. I'm not, of course, I'm covering this because I care about it and I think it's wrong what's happening. I'm laughing at the what I just read there, the words of the Chinese Communist Party, and what they're trying to, the way they're trying to spin this is I'll just recap what I just said to clarify so you guys nobody gets offended. The Chinese Communist government is claiming that their persecution of Muslims is offering an escape from poverty, backwardness, and the temptations of radical Islam. So that's what I was laughing at. That's absurd. They're enslaving these people, and I think it's wrong. But mounting evidence suggests a system of forced labor is emerging from the camps, a development likely to intensify international condemnation of China's drastic efforts to control and indoctrinate a Muslim ethnic minority population of more than 12 million in Xinjiang. Accounts from the region, satellite images, and previously unreported official documents indicate that growing numbers of detainees are being sent to new factories built inside or near the camps, where inmates have little choice but to accept jobs and follow orders. And while I'm not a Muslim, I study spiritual science. I'm into the esoteric spiritual science and the teachings of Rudolf Steiner. I don't believe in any kind of persecution, and it's an international crime, and it's a crime. It's also very unethical to persecute anyone based on several factors. You don't want to persecute people based on their sex, their age, if they're disabled, or their religion, or any of those things. So that I just don't think it's right, and that's why I'm covering this topic. And it looks like the Chinese Communist government is calling them re-education camps. And there's another article that's more recent where the Chinese Communist government was criticized over these camps. And it looks like they replied with the question, "What's the problem?" So China doesn't understand what problem people have with this, with what they're doing. The last video I did, I said I was going to post images or pictures or some video footage of the declassified UFO videos that the Pentagon recently declassified on screen, and I forgot to, but I did leave a link in the description of my last video for a video that shows the UFOs that the Pentagon recently declassified, and I believe that they're what are referred to as the Tic Tac videos, and that they're Navy. And there's a really great YouTube channel that has some interesting interviews that I'm going to promote right now. A lot of people don't know about this channel. It's called Area S4. And so George Knapp and John Lear have an interview on YouTube channel Area S4, where Knapp basically says he learned about Area 51 and all the information about Area 51 from John Lear. And it's a great interview. It gives a lot of information about John Lear and his background, a lot of stuff that people probably aren't aware of, and it just kind of adds to the credibility of John Lear, who just provides really, really great information, including that John Lear has lived in and around Nevada and also more recently Las Vegas area for so many years now. And I only mention Las Vegas because John Lear did talk about the Las Vegas shootings, and he did talk also about this underground subway that goes from under Las Vegas to one of the secret bases. And John Lear has a ton of contacts and knows a lot of people, a lot of insiders, and he just has a tremendous amount of resources. He reads a lot, and you can really get a lot from this interview by George Knapp and John Lear on YouTube channel Area S4. I'm going to leave a link in the description for the interview that I'm talking about on YouTube channel Area S4. It'll be in my description. And then there's another link I'm going to leave for a video that was an interview done by George Knapp and John Lear about a Hawthorne, Nevada secret underground submarine base in the desert. And that's a really interesting interview where they talk about this underground submarine base, military base. It's kind of a secret thing, and it's in the desert in Nevada, and I guess the submarines go through an underground channel right into the ocean. So it's really interesting, and it's something that people should check out. You'll really enjoy it if you're into that type of stuff. Another great channel is Brad Johnson. Brad Johnson is a ex-CIA intelligence officer, and he is the founder of Americans for Intelligence Reform. His website is www.intelreform.org, and I'm going to leave another link in the description for a recent interview by Brad Johnson. And I encourage everyone to check out his channel. You should check this interview out where he's talking about Obama basically having a vendetta against Michael Flynn, and had the FBI frame Flynn, and Brad Johnson's talking about Obama's recent public statements where he's trying to defend and justify his corrupt behavior. And when asked how long before the indictments related to the Flynn case are released, when Barr's going to release these indictments, Brad Johnson gives the ballpark estimate of somewhere between up to 30 days from now, between 30 to 60 days from now. So I encourage you guys, anyone that's interested in that type of stuff. I know that the news has been talking about this a little bit, but Brad Johnson, definitely an insider. And I'm going to leave a link in the description for his latest interview as well. Anyone that's not familiar with his channel, I encourage you to check it out. You'll get a lot of great information from an insider.